Missing persons cases are different in a place like Daggerland. In Westlake or even North Olmsted, a kid goes missing and there's helicopters, news crews, half the city looking. Here, you had a couple deputies, some volunteers, and whatever neighbors are still willing to tromp through the woods with a flashlight after dark. Most times, they don't find much. The thing is, these cases are almost worse than murders. With a murder, at least there's an answer. A body, a suspect, something that closes the loop. A missing person leaves nothing but an empty space. No proof of death, no proof of life, just the gnawing thought that maybe they're still out there. In a town like this, that uncertainty spreads like a layer of underlying rot. Jenny Harper had been at the town meeting that evening, sitting stiff-backed in the folding chair while Sheriff George Lost laid down the rules. No going near the lake after dark. No walking alone along the shoreline. No children near the water. If you see something strange, call the sheriff immediately. He didn't sugarcoat it. There was something out there. She'd come home with those words burned into her brain, repeating them to herself like a talisman, as she locked up the bakery, again as she drove home, and again as she walked through the front door. Now at home in her kitchen, she recited the sheriff's rules word for word while she wiped down already clean counters. No lake road after sundown, she said, scrubbing a spot that wasn't there. No water past your knees. If you hear something calling your name, don't answer. Daniel Harper leaned on the doorway, arms crossed. He'd heard it all 3 times already. Jenny, he said, the kids aren't going near the lake. We got school, work, life. Look, baby, we don't need to turn this into some kind of... The sheriff is not a hysterical man, she cut in. If he wants to lock up the town, it's because he's seen something. You weren't at the meeting. You didn't see his face. Look, Daniel began. What I see is you going overboard. Locks are fine, honey. Rules are fine, but you're talking like... I want us out of here, she said suddenly. Just for a few days. We can go to my mom's in Cleveland. We can take the kids and we can stay there until things calm down. Daniel frowned at that. That's almost a 2-hour drive at night. It's safer than staying here, she replied. Her eyes flicked toward Tyler and Megan at the table, silently eating their dinner. Tyler looked up at the word safer, but Megan kept her head down, fingers wrapped tightly around her fork. Jenny noticed the fork. She noticed everything. A cabinet door left ajar, the way the salt shaker had been moved 2 inches from where she'd left it. The crumbs that clung to the cutting board, no matter how many times she wiped it. Once she spotted something out of place, she couldn't let it go, not until it was fixed. Daniel had lost count of the number of times she'd stopped mid-conversation to straighten a picture frame or refold a dish towel. It wasn't just neatness. It was her way of keeping her fears under control. When the world got messy, when things happened that you couldn't explain or stop, she doubled down on the things she could. A crooked lampshade might get 3 separate adjustments before she was satisfied. She'd check the locks, then check them again, then run her fingers over the deadbolt just to feel it was right. That same restlessness was in her voice now. Daniel hesitated. Then he nodded. He knew his wife and he loved her, but Daniel understood that she wouldn't stop worrying until they left. Okay, honey, okay. We'll pack up and go. Jenny moved fast, because moving fast kept her from thinking too much. She made piles on the bed, 1 per person, shirts folded the same way, socks nested heel to toe, toothbrushes zipped into clear bags. She wrote a list on the back of a bakery receipt. Chargers, inhaler, snacks, water, cash. Underneath, She wrote the sheriff's exact rules in cramped block letters and tore the receipt free. Taking her first load out to the car, she taped it to the dash with a strip of blue painter's tape from the junk drawer. Her son Tyler stuffed a flashlight and his monster book into his backpack. He hovered in the doorway, half excited, half pretending he wasn't. "Are we really going to Grandma's?" "For a few days," Jenny said. "Shoes on, come on, hoodie." Her daughter Megan padded down the hall, hugging a stuffed rabbit with one flattened ear. "Does Grandma have nightlights?" she asked. "She does now," Jenny said, smiling, and dropped 2 plug-ins into the bag. Daniel did a pass for cables in his laptop. He glanced at the answering machine with 2 red blips and hit play. Mendez's voice from the station, asking folks to respect the curfew. Another from a neighbor saying the meeting got pretty serious. He deleted both and grabbed the car keys. At the door, Jenny set her palm on the deadbolt, pressed, counted to 4. She tugged the handle twice, breathed, then tugged it a 3rd time. Daniel could have teased her, but he didn't. He opened the garage instead. They finished loading the SUV. Jenny buckled Megan, then checked the buckle, then slid the strap flat because twists meant bruises. She did the same for Tyler, ignoring his eye roll. Daniel started the engine, and they rolled out slowly, tires thumping quietly on the seam at the end of the driveway, and hummed away into the night. The headlights washed over the neighborhood as they drove. They took a right at the main road and made it a half-mile before stopping at the temporary sign someone from the county had bolted onto a post. Lake Road closed after dusk by order of the sheriff. The metal looked fresh, the letters stark. They didn't have a choice. This was the only way out to I-90 West into Cleveland. "Windows up," Jenny said, her eyes fixed straight ahead. "We don't stop for anything." She took her husband's hand as they slowly pulled past the sign and onto Lake Road. Houses thinned, replaced by long stretches of scrub and the occasional dock lane arrowing toward the dark water. Far out, a buoy bell clanged once, a lonely sound carried up by a wind that smelled faintly metallic. Daniel watched Jenny's profile, how she scanned the shoulder, then the mirror, then the dash like a pilot before takeoff. The painter's tape with the sheriff's rules fluttered whenever the vents clicked on. Lake Road was narrow here, hemmed in by brush on the left and the steep drop to the water on the right. Guardrails ran in broken segments, their reflectors catching the headlights in quick white blinks. Between them, the lake showed through, black and endless, its surface rippling just enough to break up the moon's reflection. Every so often, the beam swept over a dock lane, plunging toward the water. Most were chained off, but a few stood open, the gravel shining faintly in the low light. Daniel kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel, but Jenny noticed how his jaw shifted every time one came up. The road felt quieter than it should have. Even the tires seemed muted. Somewhere out on the lake, the buoy bell gave a single hollow clang. In the back seat, Tyler leaned forward, eyes bright. "Josh said he saw a monster in the water. A real monster." His tone a mix of excitement and disbelief, like he wanted it to be true. Daniel grinned without taking his eyes off the road. "There's no monsters, Tyler." He let the pause stretch. "Except if you count Grandma." Tyler snorted. Megan giggled into a rabbit. Daniel leaned over just far enough to kiss Jenny on the cheek. "I'm kidding, honey. You know I love your mother." Jenny shook her head, but didn't hide her smile. "Uh-huh." They rounded the next bend, and that was when the headlights flickered, once, then again, before the dash lights dimmed and the SUV gave a low, shuddering cough. Daniel's eyes darted to the gauges. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. The engine sputtered, caught for half a second, then died completely. The power steering went with it, forcing Daniel to muscle the wheel as the SUV coasted forward in silence. The only sound now was the faint hiss of the tires on asphalt. Jenny's smile was gone. What is it? I don't know, honey. Battery, fuel pump, I don't know, Daniel said, guiding them toward the shoulder. He braked, and the SUV rolled to a stop beside a section of guardrail. Beyond it, the slope dropped steeply into a tangle of brush and black water. The moon shimmered faintly on the lake's surface below. Daniel set the shifter in park, killed the lights, and exhaled. Stay here, I'll check under the hood. Jenny unbuckled halfway. Call the sheriff first. I will, honey, I will, he said, already reaching for his phone as he pushed the door open. Cold air slid in immediately, smelling sharper this close to the water. Daniel's boots scuffed the pavement as he walked around to the front. He popped the hood. The hinges gave a dry squeal. Jenny rebuckled, glanced back at the kids. You both stay strapped in. Tyler was craning his neck to see past her shoulder, but Megan had sunk low, rabbit pressed close to her face. Jenny reached back, squeezed her knee, then pulled her own phone out. No bars. Outside, Daniel angled his body away from the windshield, the phone cupped to his ear. He nodded at something, kicked at the gravel, then disappeared a little farther up the shoulder. Jenny tried to see him through the side mirror, but the angle just caught the glare of their own taillights bouncing off the guardrail. She tapped her thumb on the wheel, eyes flicking between the mirror and the kids. The seconds drew out. The lake breathed against the rocks somewhere below, a slow sucking sound like water pulling at weeds. Once, a faint splash carried up, too big for a fish, too quick for a wave. Jenny told herself it was nothing. A pair of headlights swept around the far bend behind them, far enough away that they looked like two pinpricks moving through the trees. The glow grew, sliding across the inside of the SUV like a slow searchlight. Jenny sat up a little, thinking maybe it would stop. The beams climbed the curve of the guardrail, spilling silver over the hood. For a moment, the interior of the car felt warmer, safer, simply because another human being was out there in the dark with them. And then the light shifted. The vehicle behind them drifted toward the center line, its high beams momentarily bleaching the inside of the SUV so bright Jenny had to blink. She caught the profile of the driver, or thought she did, but it was gone too fast to be certain. The tires hissed past without slowing, the receding glow washing over the curve ahead before vanishing completely. And just like that, they were alone again. The darkness didn't just come back, it seemed to fold over them, thicker than before. The only light left was the anemic glow from the dash and the pale silver of the moon on the lake below. Jenny listened for the sound of the other car, an engine, anything. But all she heard was the faint slap of the water against rocks. She glanced at the clock on the dash. A little after midnight. Daniel had been outside for what, 3, 4 minutes? She thought about getting out, but her stomach tightened at the idea of standing on that shoulder with the lake yawning beside her. The driver's door opened again, and Daniel leaned in. All right, well, Marcus is on his way. Jenny blinked at that. Marcus? Yeah, he's closer than the sheriff, you know. He can be here in 15, Daniel replied, before quickly shutting the door before she could argue, and going back to the hood. Jenny stared out in shock. Her husband had not called the sheriff. Jenny sat there for a beat, pulse ticking in her ears. Then she unbuckled, shoved the door open, and stepped out into the cold. The slam echoed along the guardrail and out toward the water. Daniel straightened from the engine bay, his expression already bracing for it. "Jenny, you called Marcus?" she interrupted, striding toward him. "We're stuck on Lake Road in the middle of the night, and you call a mechanic instead of the sheriff." "Jenny, he's closer, okay? He can tow us out faster." "That's not the point," she replied. She was pacing now, hands tight at her sides. "The sheriff knows what's been happening out here. He knows what's in that lake." Daniel rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Oh my God, honey. And what's he gonna do? Show up with a net? If something's out there, George Lost isn't gonna save us any faster than Marcus can." She turned on him, eyes sharp. "You weren't at the meeting? You didn't see his face?" The wind came in off the lake, bringing that wet metal smell again. Jenny walked a few paces toward the guardrail, then back toward the SUV, her boots crunching on grit. "Jenny," Daniel warned, glancing toward the kids through the windshield. "You're scaring them." "I'm not the one," she started. But the rest never came. Something dark shot across the road, so fast it barely had shape. Just motion and weight, and the sickening thud of impact. Jenny's body jerked sideways and was gone, yanked off her feet and into the blackness beyond the guardrail before Daniel could even shout. One heartbeat she was there, pacing in the beam of the headlights. The next, there was nothing but the sound of gravel skittering over the edge and the faint slap of water below. "Jenny?" Daniel's voice cracked. He ran toward the rail, heart hammering, trying to make sense of what he'd just seen. But the space where she'd been was empty, headlights burning on nothing, the cold air swallowing his breath. From the SUV, the little girl started to scream. Daniel spun toward them, caught their wide, tear-filled eyes in the headlights' glare, then vaulted the guardrail without thinking. His boots hit the loose gravel on the far side, sliding a half step before he caught himself and started down the slope. It was steeper than it looked. The ground gave way under his heels, clumps of frozen dirt and stones tumbling toward the water. He used one hand to brace against the brush, the other out in front, ready to grab her if he saw her. "Jenny!" His voice came back to him smaller than he expected, swallowed by the cold air. The lake was a dark mirror at the bottom, the moonlight wavering across its surface. He scanned the shoreline for movement, a ripple, a shadow, anything. But it was just black water breathing against the rocks. Another few yards down, and the smell hit him. Sharp. Wet. It clung to the back of his throat. His breath puffed in quick bursts as he kept moving, the sound of the kids crying fading behind him. Then, from somewhere just out of sight to his left, came the faintest splash. Not the lazy slap of water against stone, but a clean, deliberate drop. Daniel froze, every muscle tight. "Jenny?" No answer. Just the water and the wind. He took another cautious step toward the sound, his boots crunching against the gravel. Moonlight caught movement ahead. A shape, low to the ground, its outline broken and hunched. For a heartbeat, Daniel's brain refused to process what he was seeing. Then it shifted, and he saw the trail. A dark smear glistened on the pale stones, leading from the base of the slope to the water's edge. His eyes followed it, and the air seemed to drain out of his lungs. Jenny lay face down at the end of it, her arms limp, her hair dragging in the sand. Something was dragging her. Its claws were sunk deep into her calves, hooked through denim and skin, and it moved in a strange, halting shamble. It moved deliberately, without haste, like it'd done this many times before. Each lurch dragged her another foot toward the lake, the tip of her shoes leaving shallow furrows in the wet gravel. The thing kept dragging her until the black water lapped at her knees, never looking back, never loosening its grip. Daniel thought for a strange, disjointed moment that there was something almost playful in the way it moved. It wasn't just hauling her, it was savoring it. The sway of its shoulders, the little hitch before each step. It made it look like it was keeping time to music. A memory surfaced, uninvited. A reality show he'd caught on TV a few nights back, where a couple was doing the tango. That same deliberate, side-to-side rhythm, the controlled steps, the flourish at the end. This thing was doing that, but with his wife's blood trailing behind it. Daniel's mind flicked between disbelief and rage, but his body was already moving. His hand went to his pocket, fingers closing around the slim handle of his pocket knife. He snapped the blade open without looking, the metallic click sounding small against the water's hush. "Hey," he called. That was all he could think to say. The thing stopped mid-step. Its head swiveled toward him in one slow, fluid motion. Moonlight caught its face, and there it was. Teeth too long, a grin too wide, as if the sight of Daniel was funny. Terror surged cold through Daniel's chest, but he was already moving, splashing into the shallows. The lake swallowed his boots in a single step. Then the water was at his thighs, then his waist. He kicked off the bottom and swam hard, eyes locked on Jenny's still form as the ripples closed over her. The creature didn't move. It just waited. Inside the SUV, Tyler and Megan sat frozen in their seats. The headlights still burned down the empty stretch of road ahead, but it felt darker somehow, as if the light didn't reach as far as it should. Megan sniffled, clutching her rabbit so tightly her knuckles went white. "Where's Mom and Dad?" she whispered. Tyler shook his head. He didn't want to answer because he didn't know, and because saying it out loud might make it real. The car was too quiet. The only sound was the faint tick of the cooling engine and their own breathing. Every so often, a gust of wind rattled the branches along the slope, and Megan would flinch. Tyler gripped his flashlight tighter, angling it toward the floorboard so its glow didn't spill onto the windows. He kept telling himself not to look toward the water. Megan sniffled again. "I don't like it here." Neither of them moved. Then, under the soft rhythm of the waves, came another sound. Low at first, almost like distant thunder. It grew, a steady, throaty rumble rolling over the curve of the road. Tyler's eyes shot to the rearview mirror, but the darkness there stayed unbroken. The noise swelled, joined by the faint crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights crested the bend behind them, washing through the SUV's interior like daylight. Megan let out a shaky breath. It was a pickup truck. The truck's engine idled low, filling the silence with a heavy hum. Its headlights stretched long across the guardrail, cutting sharp shadows into the slope. Megan pressed closer to Tyler, clutching her rabbit to her chin. Her eyes stayed locked on the rear window until a shape moved across the beams. A man stepped in the light, his limp pronounced as he came forward. His coat hung heavy around his shoulders, and in his hand a small toolbox clinked with every uneven step. Marcus Wilkins, the town mechanic. Marcus looked older than his years, though no one could quite pin down how old he actually was. Thin but wiry, his frame had the kind of strength that came from decades of lifting car parts and tires rather than gym weights. His shoulders carried a permanent stoop, and he favored his left leg with a subtle limp that made his gait uneven. His hands told the story most clearly, bent at the knuckles, stiff with arthritis, yet still strong enough to wrench a bolt free when no one else could. Grease was embedded so deep into his skin that it never fully washed out. Even his fingernails carried permanent stains, like shadows he couldn't scrub away. His face was sunken but sharp, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed both weary and alert at the same time. His thinning hair, once black, was now almost completely gray, and he wore it cropped short to keep it out of his work. Despite the wear, there was a steadiness about him. A man who knew every rattle and cough of his customers' cars, and who carried that knowledge like armor. He'd lost his wife the previous spring, brain cancer taking her slowly. Since then, Marcus had driven his old truck more, always on the lookout for work to keep himself busy. His only son, Tommy, lived out on the Pennsylvania coast, visiting maybe once a year. Marcus didn't hold it against him. His son had his own family, his own life. But that did mean the shop was quieter than it used to be, and Marcus filled the silence the only way he knew how, with work. And not just paying work. Somewhere along the line, kids in town had figured out that if your bike chain snapped or your handlebars wouldn't straighten, Marcus was the one who could fix it. No charge, no lecture, just a nod, a few turns of a wrench, and the thing was working better than new. Word got around, and before long it became something of a ritual. A bent frame or broken pedal meant a trip to Marcus's shop. He'd even fixed up little Tyler Harper's bike last year. The boy probably didn't even remember. It was just one of those small-town miracles kids take for granted. But Marcus remembered. He remembered every chain he'd set back on its sprocket, every wheel he'd trued. And the very same man who'd once mended what Tyler thought was an impossibly broken bicycle was about to save his life. Marcus stopped at the side of the SUV, bending to peer through the glass. His face was tired, worn by years of hard work and long winters, but steady in a way that made Tyler's chest loosen just a little. "You kids all right in there?" His voice was muffled through the glass, but calm, normal, like this was just another breakdown on just another night. "Where's Mom and Dad?" Megan's voice wavered before Tyler could answer. There's a monster," she blurted. Too fast, like if she didn't get it out, she'd choke on it. Her small hands clutched at her brother's sleeve. "It took Mom." The words hit the glass, muffled, broken by her trembling breath. To Marcus, it was like hearing through a storm window, half-swallowed syllables, jagged with panic. He caught only fragments. Monster. Mom. He leaned closer, cupping a hand around his ear against the glass. "Say again?" His voice was steady, though his heart thumped a bit harder in his chest. Tyler shook his head violently, pulling Megan closer, like the very air outside might grab her. Marcus raised a palm, slow and calm, then motioned to the lock with 2 fingers. "All right, come on. "It's okay," he said. "Open up now." For a long moment, nothing moved inside. Just two pale faces staring back, eyes wide, chest heaving. Then, with a tiny metallic click, the lock slid. Marcus eased the door open before they could change their minds. "All right, come on," he murmured, helping Megan down first, then Tyler. His big hands steadying them both, as if they were made of glass. He guided them toward his truck, his body angled between them and the darkness at the tree line. "All right, get in now," he said. "You're safe. I'll take care of you." He got them into the backseat of his truck, closing the door with a gentle but firm click. Megan clutched Tyler's arm so tightly her knuckles whitened. Both of them pressed together in the dark cab like they thought the glass might shatter at any second. Marcus gave them a steady nod, a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, before circling around to the driver's side. He slid behind the wheel, fished the radio handset off its clip, and thumbed the button. "Hey, Sheriff's Office, this is Marcus Wilkins out on Old Lake Road. I got two kids here, scared out of their minds. Something happened. I need somebody out here soon as possible." A burst of static, then a woman's voice crackled back through the line.
"Marcus, this is Mendez. Sit tight and I'll get a unit to you right away. Where exactly are you?"
"Well, we're a couple miles past Palmer's Bluff," he began, his eyes flicking to the side mirror, scanning the tree line. "Pulled over by a black SUV. Kids were inside. Their parents..." He paused, realizing that the kids were listening. "Well, we just need help right away," he finished. There was the briefest pause before Mendez came back, her tone sharper now.
"Copy that. Stay put, Marcus. Sending someone out now."
Marcus let the handset rest in his lap, staring out into the darkness beyond his headlights. His gut twisted. The kids were safe for the moment, but the night out here felt wrong. He took a slow breath, then glanced back at the two small faces peering over the seat, eyes wide and waiting. "You two just sit tight," he said, voice softer. "Help's on the way." He leaned a little closer over the seat. "Tell me what happened." Tyler opened his mouth, then shut it again. His eyes darted to Megan, who clutched her rabbit tight. Finally, he said, "Something took them." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Took them where?" "To the water," Megan whispered. He reached over to the passenger seat, fingers closing around the long-handled wrench lying there. The weight was solid, familiar. He slid out of the cab, boots crunching gravel, and glanced back at the kids. "Don't open these doors," he said firmly, "unless it's me or the sheriff." He hesitated a beat, thinking of the children, and then added, "You know, when I get scared, I squeeze my hand into a fist. Reminds me I'm still here." He gave them the faintest wink and shut the door behind him. Marcus limped toward the guardrail, the wrench loose but ready in his hand. He stopped at the edge, where the headlights bled pale light across the brush, and leaned over. Down below, the beach glistened in strips of moonlight, the lake lapping slow and steady against the stones. He squinted, searching the shoreline. Marcus narrowed his eyes. Something was lying there, a pale shape against the darker gravel. For a moment, he thought it might just be driftwood. But then he saw an arm, a body. He glanced back in the direction of the tow truck. 2 small faces pressed to the glass, waiting. Marcus lifted the wrench in a little half wave, stay put, and swung one leg over the guardrail. His boot slipped on the gravel slope, but he caught himself and began working his way down toward the shoreline, slow and careful, the wrench still gripped tight. The air grew colder the closer he got to the lake. The sound of the waves slowly lapping against the rocks was all he could hear now. At the bottom, the stones crunched underfoot. The body lay sprawled at the edge of the tide, hair dark and wet, limbs at odd angles. Marcus approached, his limp pronounced in the shifting gravel. "Hello?" he called softly, though he already knew there'd be no answer. The figure didn't move. He crouched, bracing himself on the wrench, and in the moonlight he saw the face of a woman, tall, maybe 5'8", he figured, with dark hair plastered across her cheek, her eyes half open and clouded. Marcus's gut tightened. He swallowed hard, forcing himself closer. Her blouse was torn open across the torso, the fabric soaked through and clinging to the skin beneath. At first, it looked like some dark bruise spreading across her right side, until he realized it wasn't bruising at all. It was absence. The flesh beneath her ribs had been ripped open, the cavity raw and hollow. There was no blood pooling, no frantic bleeding the way an injury should have looked. Just a gaping, ragged space where something had been carved out. Inside the tow truck, Tyler and Megan waited in silence. The dome light had clicked off, leaving them lit only by the faint green glow of the dash and the wash of headlights cutting into the night. Megan clutched her rabbit so tight her knuckles ached. Tyler stared straight ahead, trying to keep his breath steady, trying not to think about how long Marcus had been gone. And then a thump, heavy, deliberate, somewhere outside in the gravel. Both of them froze. Another thump, closer this time. Footsteps. Big ones. Megan's eyes widened. "It's him," she whispered, voice thin with hope. "It's the man that helped us." Tyler wanted to believe it. He craned his neck toward the side window. "Yeah, it's just him. Has to be." But when they turned, all they saw was darkness beyond the glass. Something stood there, close enough that its bulk blotted out the reflection of the trees. They couldn't see its face. It was too tall, the top half hidden in shadow above the window line. Only its outline was visible, a slanted shoulder, the rise and fall of something breathing slow and steady. Tyler's heart hammered in his chest. Megan shrank back, her rabbit pulled up beneath her chin. A hand moved. No, not a hand. Longer. A claw. It slid slowly across the glass with a wet, dragging sound. The smear it left behind was dark, streaking through the fogged surface in slow strokes. One line. Another. Then another, looping back around. The kids watched in horror as letters began to form. Their breath fogged the inside, while the thing smeared from the outside. The letters crooked, but unmistakable. It read, "Hello." Megan whimpered, a high, choked sound. But before Tyler could shush her, the figure shifted. The weight outside pressed forward. In an instant, the window was filled, face mashed flat against the glass, grin wide. The eyes rolled and locked onto theirs. It held up something red towards the kids, something dripping, and took a big, happy bite of it. Tyler didn't realize it then, but he was staring at a human liver. The thing winked. Megan gasped and dove for the middle of the seat, her rabbit squeezed against her chest. Tyler forced himself to tear his eyes from the window. His hand shot to the door handle, pressing down on the lock to make sure it was still tight. "Check yours," he said quickly. Megan's fingers trembled, but she shoved the knob down until it clicked hard. She nodded, eyes wide, breathing fast. For a moment, the cab was silent. Outside, the creature was still, and then it leaned back, grinned, and tilted its head toward the handle. Slowly, it lowered one long claw until it tapped against the keyhole, like it was testing the shape. And then the claw slid inside. The sound was worse than they imagined. A scraping, scratching whine that made Megan clap her hands over her ears. Tyler bit his lip, frozen, watching the thing's shoulders shift as it probed with exaggerated care, twisting the claw as if it were a skeleton key. The creature pressed its face closer to the glass, eyes rolling toward them, grin widening as it worked. It was enjoying this. There was a scraping sound, and then click. The lock popped up with a tiny sound. The claw lingered there for a moment, savoring it, and then it slid up to the handle, curling slow and deliberate around the chrome. The door trembled as the latch began to ease back. The gap opened no more than an inch, and then crack. A blur of iron smashed across the creature's head, just below its left eye. The blow rang out sharp against bone. The thing reeled sideways with a wet grunt, teeth snapping together as its grin finally broke. The kids flinched at the noise. Megan began screaming before she even realized what she was looking at. A figure stood just outside the headlights, bent slightly, chest heaving, both hands locked around the long wrench slick with lake spray. Marcus. He didn't say a word. His face was pale, eyes locked and burning, as if he hadn't climbed back up from the shoreline at all, but risen out of the earth for this one moment. Marcus lifted the wrench again, high and tight against his shoulder, knuckles wide. His bad leg trembled beneath him, but he didn't step back. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The creature straightened slowly, its hunched frame unfurling under the wash of the headlights until it seemed too tall, too broad to be standing on the narrow strip of road. Water dripped from its shoulders, pattering softly against the asphalt. Marcus held his ground and stood between the creature and the children, wrench raised, chest rising and falling, jaw tight as stone. They faced each other in the pale light, two silhouettes locked in a standoff, an old man with a bad leg, hard years etched into his hands, staring down a thing straight from a nightmare. For a moment, Marcus's mind slid 50-some years back. He was a boy again, sitting on the parson's old plaid couch with his friend Billy, a bowl of popcorn between them. Creature from the Black Lagoon flickered on the TV, black and white images casting long shadows across the room. He pretended to be tough, but the truth was it scared him so badly he wouldn't go near the lake for weeks. Every ripple in the water looked like claws reaching up from the deep. Billy had teased him without mercy, but Marcus never forgot the feeling. And now, here it was again. Only worse. Much worse. The rubber-suited monster from his childhood nightmares had nothing on the thing grinning at him under the Ohio moonlight. The night was silent, except for the steady hush of the lake below, each wave sliding against the rocks like the beat of a low drum. It was their music. The thing tilted its head and dragged one long claw against the metal door of the truck. The screech of steel on steel split the air. Sparks jumped. Marcus didn't wait. He'd never been more scared in all his life, but he shifted his grip, squared his shoulders, and swung. The wrench came down hard, a blur in the half-light, and the creature caught his arm mid-swing. Its claw clamped around his wrist, the strike frozen in place inches from its skull. For a heartbeat, the thing's eyes narrowed, as if surprised by the strength of the old man. Marcus gritted his teeth and shoved back, every muscle in his shoulders and chest straining. Decades of turning wrenches, prying rusted bolts, hauling engines off mounts. It had built a kind of stubborn strength into him. His forearms bulged, the tendons standing out like cords as he pushed against the thing. And for just that moment, he held his own. But strong as he was no match for a creature from nightmares. The grin slid back into place as it leaned closer. Slowly, deliberately, it rolled Marcus's wrist inward, bending the wrench back toward his own shoulder. His arm trembled, locked in place, pain shooting down into his elbow. Then the creature reached forward, one claw traced across his collarbone, then up the side of his neck. Marcus tried to jerk away, but the claw twitched. A sharp sting blossomed under his jaw. Warmth spilled down the left side of his neck, hot and sudden. He staggered backward, dropping the wrench and gripping his neck tightly. Inside the cab, Tyler and Megan pressed against the glass, eyes wide. Blood poured down Marcus's neck, bright and gleaming in the headlights. He staggered backward into their view, clutching at the wound with both hands. For a brief, awful moment, he turned toward the truck. His eyes found theirs through the windshield, wide, stricken, apologetic, as though he wished he could tell the children to run. His knees buckled. Marcus Wilkins crumpled to the asphalt in front of the hood, collapsing hard onto his side. Blood spread beneath him in a slick, slow-growing pool that caught the beams of the headlights and glistened like oil. Megan let out a thin wail, muffled by the glass. Tyler just stared in shock. Beyond Marcus's still form, the creature's shadow loomed, hunched and grinning, stepping forward into the wash of light. The creature turned and slowly came towards the children. Its claws curled around the door handle. Megan sobbed into a rabbit. Tyler, too frozen even to move. The door began to slowly open, and then headlights flared. An engine roared. A car slammed into the creature with bone-cracking force, the impact hurling it sideways off its feet. The thing spun across the asphalt, skidding in a blur of claws and blood before crashing hard into the guardrail with a shriek of metal. The cruiser skidded to a stop, tires screaming. Red and blue lights erupted, painting the road in frantic color. The kids blinked against the sudden blaze, hearts hammering. A man stepped out of the cruiser, dark hair beneath a sheriff's hat, brown eyes locked hard on the thing sprawled against the guardrail. His revolver was already up, steady in both hands, barrel tracking the creature as it pushed against the twisted metal. Sheriff George Lost. From the same vehicle, another man bolted forward, blondish hair showing under the brim of a baseball cap, green eyes sharp with urgency. He didn't hesitate. He went straight for the truck, straight for the kids. "Get down," he barked. Tyler shoved Megan against the seat as David Winters yanked the door open with a grunt. Behind him, George's revolver cracked. Once, twice. The creature jerked with each shot, a spray of black fluid hitting the guardrail. It still tried to rise up. George fired again. Then he holstered his revolver long enough to pull open the cruiser's back door. "Come on," he barked, waving the kids forward. David half lifted, half shoved Tyler and Megan out of the truck and across the narrow stretch of road. Megan clung to his sleeve, rabbit dangling from her arm, while Tyler stumbled ahead, pale and numb with shock. George caught them both, steadying their shoulders, and guided them into the back seat of the cruiser. "Get down, stay down," he ordered, his voice sharp but not unkind. The kids slid across the seat, clutching each other tight as the red and blue lights washed their faces. George slammed the door shut, turned back, and called over the roof, "Dave!" David was already moving, but he stopped when George's hand shot out, pointing. Marcus. He lay sprawled in front of the tow truck, blood slick and pooling beneath him. His chest heaved faintly, but his eyes were closed, his face waxy in the headlights. George sprinted first, holstering his revolver as he dropped to one knee beside him. "He's alive," he barked, though the word sounded more like a command than a certainty. David skidded in beside him, slipping an arm under Marcus's shoulders. Together they heaved him up, his body sagging heavy between them. His boots dragged along the pavement, leaving dark streaks as they staggered him toward the cruiser. "Easy, easy," David muttered, though Marcus gave no sign he heard. His head lolled against George's shoulder, blood soaking down both their sleeves. The cruiser's rear door stood open. George and David shoved Marcus inside, bracing his body against the seat. His arms flopped limp at his sides, his jaw hung slack, eyes closed. David slid in next to Marcus while trying to keep pressure on the open wound. On the other side of the seat, Tyler and Megan pressed themselves into the corner, knees tucked to their chest. Megan cried softly, hiding her face against her rabbit, while Tyler just stared at Marcus, at the blood on his throat, the rise and fall of his chest that looked too shallow, too slow. George slammed the door shut, and when he turned, the thing was already moving. It peeled itself off the guardrail and the headlights, tall and dripping, claws gleaming wet. George didn't wait. He dove into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and jammed the shifter into reverse. "Hold on," he barked. The cruiser roared backward, tires shrieking against the asphalt. The sudden lurch threw Tyler and Megan into the floor well. The headlights carved wild arcs across the road as George spun the wheel. The creature surged forward, claws raking at the pavement, but the cruiser fishtailed clear, gravel spitting like gunfire. David kept one hand tied on Marcus's wound, motioning with the other for the kids to stay down. Go, he said. George jammed the brakes, wrenched the wheel, and the cruiser spun hard. The rear swung wide, red and blue lights flashing across the trees and the black face of the leg. Then the nose came around, tires biting, and the car shot forward down the road toward town. In the mirror, for one awful second, the creature filled the beams, tall, still grinning, blood streaking down its chin. George's eyes stayed locked on the road, jaw clenched. The lake fell away behind them. Back at the sheriff's station, the quiet felt heavier than the night outside. George sat at the table, a fresh cup of coffee cooling in his hands. Across from him, David slumped forward, his shirt stained with Marcus's blood. He hadn't said a word since the ambulance pulled out. The cruiser parked out front was empty now. The kids had been picked up by their grandparents an hour earlier, bundled into the back of a minivan, and driven away from town without a word. George had stood there and watched until the taillights disappeared, feeling like he'd handed over something fragile that might shatter before it reached safety. "You think Marcus will make it?" David finally asked. "He's tough. That wound on his neck. That would have killed me." George didn't answer right away. He stared into his cup, then set it down. "Doc Graham is doing what he can." David dragged a hand down his face. "We don't even know what it was, George. We don't even know what the hell that thing is." George's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes fixed on the tabletop. He exhaled hard through his nose. "We've got cops from Ashtabula and Paynesville running the shoreline, checking every stretch they can." David looked up. "How many?" "As many as I could get," George began. 10, 12 maybe. Depends on how much time they can give us." George rubbed a hand across his face. "It's not enough. Lake's too big. Too many places to miss." David leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. "And still no sign of the parents?" George shook his head. "Not a thing. Just a few footprints by the bluff. Could be anyone. And those end about 20 yards from the water." Silence stretched. Both men knew what that meant, but neither wanted to say it. Finally, David spoke. "So what's our next move?" The sheriff didn't answer right away, just reached for his coffee. His hand hovered over the mug, but he didn't pick it up. "Well, those cops are here in town tonight," he began. "Good men, working in pairs, sticking close. I told him straight, there's something dangerous out there. Maybe I didn't spell it out, but they know enough to keep their eyes open. They brought extra firepower." David gave a slow nod. George leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And that buys us a little time. A night to think, to plan. We'll see what tomorrow brings, but people are going to want answers. I want answers. And I want my town safe again." David nodded. George fell silent. He stared into the coffee and thought. The two kids were alive, thank God, though no one could say what had happened to their parents. Both of the children kept repeating the same thing. Marcus Wilkins had saved them from a monster. George exhaled slowly. Marcus. There'd been a lot of blood. George wasn't a doctor, but he knew it was bad. It was unlikely the old mechanic would survive the night.